got, we're at right on time for class, 6:40. So hope everyone's doing well. Today definitely feels like a very fall day. It's windy, and I've been kind of nervous about tonight because I hope we don't lose electricity. So I'm holding on very tight to my phone and my computer and everything. So we'll have our devices on just in case a windstorm breaks through again in Portland. We've had a couple of outages, but hopefully, fingers crossed that we can last through tonight for 2 hours without any windstorm. So I'm really happy to have you join us. I think more and more students are also coming in. How is everyone? Yay. Yay. So this week we have some guests, as I had said, joining us from near and far. We have all of our students here in Portland, but we also have folks visiting from elsewhere who are here to join us and to listen in. And on our guest tonight. Tonight's presentation and theme is Human Connections Through Storytelling and Design. And as you know, this is not just a transportation course. So much of what we're doing underlies land use and planning and design and being cognizant of the history that has been within our infrastructure for so long. And one of the things that have been a big push in the work that we've been doing is talking about human connections and talking about how we can storytell as we work on urban design. And so tonight we have our guests. I'll share in a minute. Quincy Brown with We All Rise here locally in Portland, who will talk about some of the urban planning work that he's doing with his company. And we also have joining us from up north, Seattle, is Belén Herrera with the city of Seattle, SDOT, who's a transportation planner who's going to be sharing quite a bit about her work in her transportation work and how so much of her work also informs the human connections. And also we have joining us later is Kaleb Germinaro. I'm gonna not pronounce his name right, but he will be joining us later. He's a doctoral student at the University of Washington. And one of the reasons why we're doing this piece is really the conversation that I've had with Kaleb and Belén and also Quincy on how you design and build and bring this humanity to our work. But first off, before we open the class to Quincy to speak, I would like to introduce to you a guest from the University of Utah in Salt Lake, from the College of Architecture and Planning, Keith Bartholomew. I've been speaking to him quite a bit over the last few months, and Keith has a few words to say. He's been listening in our class on the recording, but I've really invited him and Matthew, his graduate assistant, to come and join our class live today. Keith, I will give it to you so you can share what you're doing over there. And Ananda, you could take the page off so we can see each other. Thank you.
Well, Thuy, this is quite an honor to be invited into class, and thank you for welcoming me so warmly. As Thuy says, I teach at the College of Architecture and Planning in the planning program here at the University of Utah, but I'm originally from Portland. I moved here 23 years ago, but before I moved here, I lived in Multnomah Village, and I worked as a staff attorney at 1000 Friends of Oregon. And one of the projects that I worked on was a project, I don't know if it gets any play anymore, it was known by its acronym, the LUTRAC project. And it was looking at land use planning in Washington County and ways in which land use development practices in Washington County might be altered to reduce reliance on driving. And the context was a proposal for a new freeway. They called it the Western Bypass back then. And we decided that maybe there was a better option. And so we worked for about 10 years to come up with a different solution that was more focused on transit and transit-oriented development. And it was a fun project. And then I moved here and I started teaching. And it was always in the back of my mind that maybe Salt Lake City was ready for a class like the one that you're all in, because this class got started 30 years ago when I was still living in Portland and working at Thousand Friends. And I was always so impressed by it and what it was able to accomplish. And I've thought, you know, it's a great idea. I think it would work here. And it's only taken us 30 years to get around to it. Things come to Utah slowly. They call it the Beehive State for more than one reason. And so we finally this year are getting all of our ducks in a row here, and we'll be offering a version of this very same class to community members here in the Salt Lake Valley starting in January. So we are learning from you all and eager to see what good work you're doing. And thank you again for inviting us.
Great, thank you, Keith. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope we're all in for a treat. I know we all are most of the time because our speakers are always different. I also want to mention that this is midterm, and I want to slate some time later after our guests are here to speak so that some students can share their class projects and where they're at. We did this a few weeks ago, and I think it was really a good time spent so that students can have some discussion time and share ideas and share some of the issues they're going through as they're working through their projects. So it's always a very popular part of the class over the years is the passion projects from students. So without further ado, I'm gonna kick it off with the presentations and welcome Quincy Brown to the platform to present. Quincy was a student of mine last year in this class in particular. And over time, I've learned that there's so much more that I can learn from Quincy versus him learning from us in this class. His family has been very instrumental in Oregon, and has lived in Oregon, Portland, I think most of his life, and has been very intentional in some of the work that he's been doing since graduation. And since being in the industry, he's launched this amazing nonprofit or organization called We All Rise, and they're working on some amazing projects across Portland. So I'm gonna give it to Quincy so that he can share more, but I'm really happy to have you here, Quincy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the awesome introduction. I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and feel free to post in the chat or raise your hand if you have any questions during the presentation. I'm going to try to go through pretty quickly just so we can have some more time to chat. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to the class. Awesome. So my presentation is going to focus on planning through a human-centered and historical lens. And so as was mentioned, my name is Quincy Brown, and I'm the co-founder of We All Rise. So who am I? I was raised in Northeast Portland. I'm the grandson of Judge Aaron Brown, Jr., who was the first African-American judge in the state of Oregon, and Durst Ann Burns Peterson, who started the first Black hair salon in Portland. So definitely a maker of a lot of Black resilience and activism within the space. I'm a Mellon Mays Fellow, which is a fellowship for particularly undergrad students, but continues into graduate school and PhD programs for students who are wanting to become college professors and are interested in carrying out their work through an academic space. So I'm in my last year of break from undergrad and will be moving into a PhD program, hopefully in the next couple of months. I'm the graduate of Claremont McKenna College and the University of California at Berkeley. where I majored in sustainability in the built environment and city and regional planning. I also focused on research and academics. So here's an example of a couple of my research projects I've conducted since I've been in undergrad and then while I've been taking my time off. So my undergraduate thesis was called Homecoming of the Negro Spirit, and it focused on civil rights and historical developments within different civil rights movements and looking at the abolitionist movement, the movements in the 60s, and the movements happening now and how to contextualize different theories around civil rights and how to use those in public planning and public development projects. Currently, my team is working on the multicultural reentry program, where we're looking at authentic ways to reenter folks of color into public main streets. So focusing on public space and activism. Another project I worked on was the intersection of race, poverty, and gentrification, a case study of human rights violations through urban renewal. This was a project where I got to go around to different cities through a photojournalism project and look at different main streets and communities and seeing how particularly urban renewal was used to provide efforts of poverty and gentrification. One of those spaces was the Alberta district. We will see more of kind of what our work has been doing and focusing on the Alberta district. My capstone during my undergraduate program was environmental justice, racism, and the underrepresented communities in the Inland Empire. So Claremont-McKenna is located in East LA County, between LA County and San Bernardino County. So I worked a lot on trying to support particularly Latino Americans within the Inland Empire and understanding environmental issues related to pollution and related to transportation and how to better support folks in those spaces. And then lastly, a project that I'm working on right now is the racial and environmental economic issues of transit-oriented development, a North Portland case study. This is a particularly looking at how the Yellow Line transportation program orchestrated by TriMet has created different efforts of displacement, clearly focusing on focusing on the increase of property value in those spaces and how that has led to gentrification displacement. So a lot of my work is really looking at the intersection of gentrification and displacement and how those efforts are seen in public space and what we can do about them as planners. So here's an example of kind of photos, some photos from some of my projects. So we really at We All Rise really focus on the idea of social equity and human-centered design. So these are 3 of our projects that we've done over the past couple of years. The one on the very far right was in the J District, where we created a public seating program in a business park. So we worked with the Pano and some other folks to make sure that folks in the J District had opportunities for outdoor seating, realizing that there's not really main streets or other infrastructure that's supportive for right-of-way seating. So wanting to figure out how could we use the PBOT Healthy Business Permitting Strategy as a tool to support Asian-owned businesses in the J District. Another example of our project on Alberta Street is we worked with Portland Fruit Tree Project to distribute Portland fruit trees around the Alberta district and allowing for, once these fruit trees come to maturity, allowing for fruit to be picked by anyone. And then also you can see there's a QR code where you can learn more information about Portland Fruit Tree Project and where the kind of portable orchards are going to be displaced around town. The last project that we worked on in the fall with Prosper Portland and PBOT and a number of other organizations was the Kinetic Collective. This was a pop-up vendor space in the Y10 building on 901 Southeast Yamhill, where we worked with Oracle Infused, Swabkin, and Kurdish Nomadic Rugs as vendors to create a pop-up Black acceleration space focusing on mobility and civil rights. So We All Rise created a small, which you'll see in the next slide, a small Black History Museum. And we also supported these vendors in being able to learn how to set up in a commercial space, market themselves. And we also worked with the PBOT and we worked with SPIN to create a micromobility hub. The location of the Kinetic Collective was adjacent to one of the TriMet's stations. And so we wanted to get more folks into downtown and trying to figure out how we can create more opportunities for people of color to pop up and be a part of the downtown region. So a lot of my work really focuses on history and experience and how that informs design. And so, as was mentioned, I grew up in the North and Northeast Portland, particularly in the Albina district. And a lot of the information I was shared when I was a kid was around the displacement and the different kind of civil rights movements that were happening in this space. So when I was able to work downtown, I created a Black History Art Museum that took photos of my family's experiences on top of creating small vignettes of different Black experiences. So in the very far right, you can see my environmental justice gallery where I put in different plants and different quotes from the ways in which Black people have used either plants or used vegetables or other like environmentally friendly activities that were happening. And so my focus was really trying to figure out how to re-enter folks into commercial districts, but also have a historical narrative at the front of that design. On the left side, you can see the structure that we created on Alberta Street. This was an opportunity for us to have a pop-up vendor market so that we were able to give vendors an opportunity to create micro storefronts during the summer. And so we created this vendor pop-up structure to try to figure out different ways to utilize the healthy business permitting strategy that was away from just outdoor seating. So really, this is an example of engagement with the intent to redress. So redress historical inequities that maybe have happened in different spaces of Portland, but also focusing on uplifting and celebrating culture and experience. So our firm really focuses on the idea of tactical urbanism within public space. And so unlike a lot of other planning firms that maybe take 10 to 15 years or to work on really long-term plans, our role is really to work on those 3 to 4 month plans. And so how can we be tactical and really ignite public space as quickly as possible? And these demonstrations are really to inform and to fail. So I think it's sometimes hard for us as planners to fail in projects, but having these abilities to have a tactical urbanism in pop-up spaces allows us to test and understand how we can best engage with the community and best create long-term design opportunities. And so a lot of the products that we do really do kind of test the innovation capacity of the city. On the right side is one of the outdoor seating programs that we supported last summer, so summer of 2020. This was located on 31st and Killingsworth. And so you can see that we worked with the Killingsworth area to create a mural and then having outdoor seating. And then there was also outdoors, there's also a covered area that's there now. In the middle, you can see a continuation of the Kinetic Collective. This is as it was being developed. So you can see that there was a desegregation house. So this is our affordable housing installation. And we had a free wall where people could draw and paint and just add to the museum as they wanted to. This was the free stage, so that it was in development. So I painted a stage to kind of allow for folks to be able to perform, be able to have spoken word. And then on the very left is my friend Jasmine. She's a dancer and she led some dancing pop-up activities that happened there. So we were able to give this space to people to be able to pop up, hold dance classes, perform, and just to have a space that was kind of a community area. And then the last two sections are implementations on Alberta. We have a public planter box that can be used from anyone. And then we also have the Alberta market. So really trying to understand how to provide authentic in-person community engagement. So having a tactical urbanism space, but then being able to have folks engage with it and then getting information instead of having surveys, really being able to get people to be inside of a space and be able to give feedback about that space. And so that space can then continue to develop and change as that feedback is given. And so this is kind of a list of our current and future projects that we all rise. So currently I sit on Metro's Committee on Racial Equity. I've been on that committee for about 2.5 years now. So really supporting Metro as it uplifts its strategic plan to advance racial equity. We're working on a Metro affordable housing project on 74th and Gleason. So really trying to figure out how can we create more opportunities for people of color, particularly to continue to re-enter into Portland proper. We teach a very similar class as this class. It's more youth focused and it's community focused at Southeast Uplift. It's our transportation land use leadership class. And then we work with the Port of Portland and their trade and equitable development program. We support Bike Town and the Prescribe a Bike program. And then we've been working kind of on our own on this a digital equity program. So figuring out what resources folks might need to continue to be able to share and work together on digital resources like computers and Zoom. And then we were working on a National Science Foundation project focusing on the implementation of smart cities. So with that, that's kind of a background of who I am, what I do, and then what our organization is. So if you all have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat and I will start sharing my screen so I can see it.
We got a quiet bunch tonight. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or not. I see Joan's hand up, but she also has a question.
It was the same one. I was just gonna.
Yeah.
First, I just wanted to say that I think I'm just sort of awestruck, Quincy, by all that you are doing, and just really, like, it's really moving to hear you talk about, like, especially as a young black man, all that you're doing, and at such a young age to contribute to the city. So I'm actually a little bit moved by all of this. So thank you for that. Having said that, I'm actually super curious. I didn't catch. I started trying to Google for some things and I didn't get them all. If you have any of this stuff that you've published or written about that's been or linked, if you could just give me a couple places where I can go and dig it up, I would love to see that stuff, because it seems like the stuff you're doing is really important. And I guess I don't know. I guess I'm sort of just curious about how you sort of figured out that planning was the place for you to be at such a young age. And I don't know if that's like a weird question. I feel like I wasn't even aware of it or understood what it was. And, until, adulthood.
Totally.
I told you he's pretty amazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah.
I just posted my thesis. It's not in the best shape. So but that's just where it's published. So feel free to check that out. And then all the other publications I talked about, I have, so I'll send those out and then y'all can just check them out via email. And then to answer your question about planning, I kind of fell into my lap. My mom, she got a job at TriMet in the HR department when I was 3 years old. And my dad was a commercial loan officer at Albina Community Bank. And so I definitely saw like what they were doing, and I didn't really want to be a banker, didn't really want to, do HR, but I was really passionate about like community development. And I actually worked on a lot of Safe Routes to School programs when I was in elementary school and middle school, just supporting my elementary school, and I was a safety patrol captain and worked with the PBOT to kind of try to figure out safe routes. But I didn't know that was planning. I just thought that was what it meant to be a good person in your city. And so my first introduction to planning happened. I was taking a class called Public Space Studio, and I was actually in the history department, and just went straight into planning after taking that class my sophomore year, because I realized that where it's really important to study the historical aspects of planning, development, policy, and why things happen, it's also important to take those concepts and then apply them to make them better. And so it really was just out of kind of professors pushing me in that direction. And then coming back home, I came back home in 2019 and was really just excited and hyped to be back in Portland. And then COVID happened. And so a lot of the concepts that I was working on in LA, there's a lot of public park kind of pop-up concepts that happen in LA, because LA doesn't have a lot of public parks. I was okay, I've done these events before. I know how to do this. And I know how to navigate this bureaucratic process to make sure that the community that I'm working with or supporting actually has the ability to have a say. And then it kind of just happened. So I think what I really see as planners, and what the important aspect of planning is that we really have to be supportive of the community. And we really, I always tell my colleagues and my staff, it's we don't work for our clients, we really work for the community. And it's our role to push back to our clients and get our clients to understand what the community needs, and making sure that each time a project is being phased or developed, that whatever the community is articulating is actually brought into design. And so I've been really enjoying what I do, and yeah, it's been really fun fun process. Thank you for the comment.
We also have a handful of questions in the chat, but Sean has his hand up. So I want to take Sean's question next, and then we can also address some of the ones that are in the chat.
Hi, Quincy. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
My question is about tactical urbanism. I'm very interested in this. Did you experience any pushback or feedback from homeowners or business owners when you were doing your installations?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I have a very, like, I'd say privileged in one sense because I'm from Portland and I'm from the community, like, positionality when it comes to doing tactical urbanism, especially within the Alberta district. As I mentioned, like, my family grew up over there. My mom grew up on 7th and Fremont. And so a lot of the folks that I worked with, I either knew before or had some type of connection to. And again, like, I think the thing with tactical urbanism is it's really important to bring the community along with the project that you're doing. And so what I really tried to do was, when I was working with a business owner or homeowner, like when I was trying to understand what their concerns were, their needs were, I was like, how can I then invite you in to be a participant of this project? And so I think that's a really good way of trying to navigate the particular folks that maybe aren't super excited about new products coming in. Is I think the biggest thing that folks suffer from is not really being adequately engaged with and then not being adequately involved in the process. So if there's ways in which, you're doing a tactical urbanism project that you can make sure that, like, you get as many people involved, I think that's the ability of tactical urbanism. And then you're able to really start improving and developing and expanding that as you get more and more people involved and more people see, like, oh, like, here's this structure and this marketplace. Like, how do I now vend to this marketplace? Or how do I put up a mural on this street now? And so I feel like the tactical urbanism concept should really be with the goal of bringing people together, getting community members to start participating and be kind of, the first step in a large scale development project.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few questions in the chat, some great comments also on your work, Quincy. There's a question from Jordana, talks about kind of the old age of how we add improvements such as parks and trees to low income neighborhoods, but not encourage gentrification. I don't know if that's something that you're touching on right now in some of your work. I think you are actually.
Yeah, I can share. And it kind of goes back to the first question that was added. I think the biggest thing is that there aren't a lot of planners of color or people from my community that have this knowledge and ability to plan. And so I think what has tended to happen is a lot of community engagement has been done with the idea of extracting information from communities and not really provided just compensation for their knowledge. And so what I think We All Rise tries to do differently is really address the fact that a lot of these gentrification efforts and displacement efforts come from not having authentic relationships being built. And so we really start at that point and then try to understand, okay, what is the actual thing that's the community's missing from public space, and how can we start solving some of those issues, and then go in with the idea of information sharing and educating about the importance of parks, the importance of trees, the importance of bike infrastructure, and then how do we then start allowing for folks to be a part of that design. One concept that we're working on right now with PSU and the National Science Foundation is actually centered around trees and realizing it can be really expensive to maintain and keep a tree. And so what we're trying to do now is try to figure out, okay, so how can we start getting folks to realize the air quality and air pollution issues of their neighborhood and how trees would solve that, but then create some type of maintenance plan and is in a parcel so that maybe if a resident decides that they are going to take care of a tree, that they know that within 3 years, they're going to have to do some type of maintenance on that tree, and they can start planning and saving and putting away money to be able to take care of that tree, but then also see the public health benefits of that particular tree. And so I think it's really just like making sure that we don't engage with people thinking that they know everything about a concept, but also again, like I'll keep hitting it home, making sure that residents are part of the process as we add more things and we demonstrate more projects. And I think a really great example of this is the People's Park in Berkeley. It's one of my favorite case studies of just when a whole community realized there was a lack of green space, there was a lack of being able to have public conversations. They came together and created their own park, and they've been maintaining that and allowing particularly folks who are houseless to be able to support in that development. So creating that community ownership aspect, I think, is really how folks feel discouraged to leave their neighborhoods, because I think a lot of the impacts of gentrification displacement, they're economic for sure, onefold, but I think a lot of it is the fact that businesses, community centers, churches, they leave. And so then community members have to keep traveling back and forth between where they're living and where maybe their restaurants and churches and community spaces have gone to. So then the community members leave. And so I think if you're able to create a space where the community sees ownership in that space, even if like some of their restaurants get displaced out of that area, they still have ownership over that implementation that you've done. And they feel like they're still a part of that community and feel comfortable traveling to maybe go to the bar that they used to go to, if that makes sense.
Great. Speaking of restaurants and bars, there's one comment that came from Kathy here in which she said that it's so great that some of your projects are not centered around food and it's not so food centric, and that you have art that comes along with it and retail. Any lessons you've learned that differs from what typically ends up as an outdoor street use, such as restaurants and bars? How does other things get integrated that promotes different audience to the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really takes like just community members doing different things. I think the program that PBOT put in like didn't attempt to do like as much as it's doing right now. And so I think there's just, I'd say there's twofold. There's, we're in a pandemic and it's really hard to plan long term. And so there was a goal in which wanting to service business and restaurants that were hurting. But I think that there was a lack of understanding of like street festivals that were going away and all the other things that happen on the streets that would kind of support community members. And so the biggest lessons I think I've learned is, when you get free space, use it. And I think that's where I've been trying to push a lot of community members and realizing it's like, there's free permanent space and it is probably going to keep being like that for another year or so. So as much as you can permit, as much as opportunities you can put new things in, do it. It's very simple. It's a very easy process. PBOT is really just giving permits away. And the only thing you have to have is commercial liability insurance, which is like $100 a month. And so you can actually start doing some really cool things on the public right of way without having to pay the normal property taxes and other stuff that you would need to pay to be able to do these things. And then you can create free opportunities. We had concerts, we had markets, we had just like community events, booths and stuff like that, that we didn't have to pay the normal renting fee of a park by doing so.
Yeah, there's a handful of things we're trying to launch too together on a project. So hopefully it'll come through.
Yeah.
A few more questions before we move on. I think you've really, really blessed with having you here today, Quincy, to share with what you're doing. Hendrik has a question regarding some of the current or planned transportation land use developments in Portland. And what do you, from your perspective, see that Portland has done well and what the city has not done well?
Yeah, totally. So I'm a big fan of environmental projects. So I think the biosoil program that we've been doing is phenomenal and is really addressing, I think, is going to address long-term a lot of our flooding that's probably going to end up happening in the next 10 years. So I think just giving more space, right-of-way space for trees, for pollinator gardens, for that kind of stuff, and having an educational component to that has been awesome. But I think the Healthy Business Permitting Program is also a great opportunity to continue doing that type of work and pushing those ideas of road diets and street initiatives that'll give us more healthy and more sustainable streets. I think, I mean, I could write a book on what I think the city is maybe not doing so well, but I think it really comes back to the collaborative governance opportunity that the city has that we're not really using. It's phenomenally hard to navigate each bureau. And it takes a master's in planning to know how to navigate between like the Bureau of Environmental Services and PBOT and Prosper Portland. And often times I find myself putting a group chat together in an email chain to just be like, hey friends, like let's all work together on this concept. And so I think, I'll like touch point on one of my colleagues, like Mingus Maps is doing a really good job of trying to figure out how do we restructure the city government so that it can be more efficient, so that, if you do have a street-based issue, you're not having to, reach out to 4 different bureaus and then try to organize all those bureaus as a community member to address your like one issue of a biosoil. And so I think that is really the hardest thing, is it does take someone who really knows what they're doing to do a public project if they want it to have the impact it does, because it's just so spread out in terms of how the bureaus work.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'm going to take it from Hami. So you have your hand up.
Hi there. Thank you. This is really pretty mind-blowing. Really awesome stuff. Thank you for being here. And I guess my question is, it kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about. I'm involved in the advocacy world, and I find it a bit disheartening that one individual or 2 individuals, or whatever the number is, have to kind of put themselves out there and get something very, very small done, like putting in some public seating or a plaza or something like that. So how do we get our city more empowered? It's usually the other way around, right? Individuals need to feel empowered, but I kind of feel like our city needs to feel empowered as a government to really do what it takes to do this wholesale. How do we do that as citizens?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see it as a two-front fight. I see it as a sense where we have all the resources and the networks in Portland to make really good public space, like probably the best in the country, to be honest. And from what I've seen, just what's left over from what the 90s provided, it seems like we were doing these things. Like there's really awesome public like neighborhood plazas. I live in Southeast. There's like a neighborhood plaza that was made that's still there. Hawthorne's a really good example of a lot of the kind of tactical urbanism gone like large scale urban planning. And I think it takes the partnerships and the collaboration of individuals that have something to give, that have the ability to give, and that want to collaborate. I mean, one of the products that we did last summer was working with Anderson Construction, Porque No, Apano, Alberta Main Street to collaborate on how do we get outdoor seating out to the community, and then how do we start making these public plazas so that there are spaces for people to not only eat, but also, work from home or vend or, have their kids just play on an outdoor seating space. And so I think what I've noticed is that we're just very siloed as a government, but also very siloed as a community. And the more times we're able to come together in classes like these and try to work together, I think will be important. And then also just realizing like, who do we head up to ask these questions and like work with each other? I think there's a really good opportunity to working with the Rebuild Center, working with Sustainable Wood Northwest, working with, City Repair. There's all these organizations that have done this work before, but I don't think they're necessarily getting empowered by city government. But I think there's also a twofold of the city government's not getting the information from the community that it needs to be able to start empowering where they're making decisions. And, it's also, we're in a pandemic and everyone's overworked and understaffed. So I think for us, as a young planner and like young community members, we just want the city to be better so that we can raise families here. And so I think I would say really calling on the youth We have the time, we have the energy, and we don't need as much money as other folks to do a lot of this work. And we're open to failing, we're open to changing, we're open to moving things around. And, you know, I think the last thing I'll say is, like, as a young person who's been working in this space, it's been very challenging to be taken seriously or even be getting funding for the work that I do. And it's, you know, I will often get, you know, like, there's a lot of ageism on top of racism, on top of like all the intersections that happens as a planner. And I think the less that we can, you know, move away from those kind of like, you have to have 20 years of experience, you have to have a master's, you have to be like from Portland, and more or less just getting people that care, that want to be involved in public processes, I think is what's going to solve a lot of our like small scale issues. And then if we can solve the small scale issues, we can start creating those supply chains necessary to address the larger scale issues as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Quincy. Like I said, every time I talk to Quincy, there's so much I learn, so much more than I can bargain for. But it's always great to have you here. Please stay as you can. But we will have, next up is also a really good friend of mine. She's has moved up north, working for SDOT, and a transportation planner, and she's just doing some amazing work up there. So Belén, I'm going to hand it to you and really give you the floor so that you can share some of the work that you're doing. And welcome to the class. Belén was once at PBOT as an intern, and this is how we met years ago, and she's grown up and moving out.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you so much, Tweety, for inviting me to come back to a different set of cohort students to come talk. I definitely feel more comfortable now talking about my work since I've been with the Seattle Department of Transportation for a few years. For those who have never met me, I pronounce my name Belén. For those who can't get the accent down, I go by pronouns she and her. I identify as Latina, Mexican American, and I try to make it a more consistent practice that I acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territory of the Duwamish tribe here in Seattle. And so let me see if I can, Tweet, are you sharing my PowerPoint? Because I don't know if I can see how to share.
Can you, Ananda, I think we made Belén a screen share, a co-host.
Oh, okay, now I see it. Okay.
Yeah, we made you a co-host. Would that be okay?
Yes, 1 second. I do this all the time on Microsoft Teams, which is our preferred format for Seattle. And now I'm like, okay, gotta learn Zoom. Okay, presentation. Nope, now I closed it. 1 second. I'm like, oh boy.
The other thing is that we can share too.
Okay.
Would it be easier if we shared?
Let's do. Yeah, if you want to share it, because I realize I'm trying to like figure out how to play the.
Oh, okay. Ananda, can you bring it up and advance the screen? Let's do that. Don't worry, Belén.
Okay, because I'm like, I made it in Google Slides, but that's because I'm also a mentor for Kaleb's group, which I don't know if y'all see him on the screen, for a different crew. And I was like, I just kind of use a similar format and they use Google Slides. And I'm like, okay, sure.
Okay, so hold on. I am going to be sharing the screen. I'll do this. Okay, guys.
Yay.
I'm running a few things at the same time. Okay.
Okay, no worries.
Got it? Okay, you tell me when to flip.
All right, go ahead and go to the next one. And I think I have like very minor, only press it once though, because it will do one pop-up before I get to the next one. So as long as it says the word cost, so just bring up the word cost and don't touch anything else. Hopefully it works.
Can you see what's on the screen right now? It says small.
Yeah, small, papel picado, and the location of this awesome crosswalk.
Is that on?
Yes. I just added like 2 animations to it, so that's why you need to click it once more. And
Okay.
And then hopefully no one sees the second option. There we go.
Got
Okay.
it.
All right. There we go.
Okay.
Don't click anything yet.
Okay. Oh my God.
Okay.
I'm like my own IT today. Okay, got it.
All right. Thank you. All right. So for folks, I'm going to just kind of briefly go through the work because mostly a lot of what I've learned in the first few years of my career is mostly, here's a project, go do this project, and don't question the process. Like, it was just like, okay, go buy the books. And here is an example where it actually went well beyond just the books. And this is only done in the past year. So papel picado, for folks who are not familiar with the Mexican culture, papel picado is a specific, very delicate paper that is used as a decoration during Day of the Dead, which was this past Monday, November 1st, and Tuesday, November 2nd. And traditionally, a pedestrian crosswalk is just like those white bars that you see going from curb to curb or curb ramp to curb ramp. And in this instance, near 8th Avenue South and South Cloverdale Street intersection, that neighborhood is predominantly Latino and Mexican, Hispanic, depending on what the community prefers, but that is largely the demographic in that area. And so my colleague, Davi Encino, is a construction crew chief. So there's like a difference in the hierarchy. And he actually physically designed this papel picado and then got it imprinted for this colorful paper. And so not was it that only very significant for the community, it was also using the bounds of what we can do in the public right of way. And so it was pretty exciting to get this done. No, Twee, go back, what? You went too soon.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I was going to have everybody guess, and hopefully I can do them in future ones, of what you thought the cost
Okay, I can't touch anything.
of what you thought the crosswalk was going to be. Don't worry, we have a few more slides. Typically a marked crosswalk, because it's just paint, if it's just traditional white paint, it would only be on the lower end of $5,000. But a crosswalk such as this, which has multiple colors, also very intricate design, it was on the higher end. And so this is an example where it was pretty radical for specifically the Department of Transportation to do more than just a white marked crosswalk, which I thought was pretty awesome. I'm so glad that my colleague Davi gets to use his more creative style and creativity for the department. All right, next one, please. Let's see if it goes.
Got it?
Okay, yes, and only click it one more time and then leave it alone.
Whoops. Okay,
There
I'm
we
not
go.
touching anything.
Okay. So here's another really awesome concept that I wanted to share in terms of design and placemaking, which is how, believe it or not, these are curb bolts, which are at the intersection of 8th Avenue South between South Cloverdale and South Dissel. So still relatively in the same neighborhood that is predominantly Latino. This is before we put these physical white posts, so that way people will actually drive around it and provide a little bit more protection, shortening the pedestrian crossing from curb to curb. And so if you look at it again, it's not just your traditional white paint on the floor. These designs, does anyone want to take a guess of where these designs may come from in the Mexican culture? If you want to take a guess in the chat. Okay, I see silence, that's okay. Kind of get your noodle thinking of what this might cost. And so great guess, Kathy. Not quite face paint. So I don't have the cup on me now. It's in my cabinet, but there are these very colorful, playful mugs that often have like hot drinks, cold drinks, whatever you want. But those designs are often on very colorful, playful mugs specifically to the Latin culture. And so again, my colleague, Davi Encino, designed this on a really cool software program and then got it installed for this very amazing historically Latino neighborhood. So I want to see everyone put their guess into the chat to see how much do you think a curb bulb cost? Not necessarily a decorative one, but just a curb bulb in general.
Including the delineators?
Yep, all inclusive. What do you think would be the cost for curb bulbs? Okay, I see 8,000 from Kathy, 1,000 from Hammy, 20K from Sam, 9,000 from Debbie, 8K from Shawnee, $500 from Joan. Not even close, Joan, but nice try. And then 4,000 from Hendrik. Oh man, if only a sign costs $500, Joan. Oh, the paint. This paint has to be long-term and also be weather resistant, so not quite. Okay, T, go ahead and hit the button. And it should.
Price right.
Yep, this is the cost for a colorful but also very safety enhancement, cultural inclusive design, $50,000.
Wow.
Yes. But honestly, considering for all four, so it's a complete intersection of where these curb bulbs are at. And so I'm particularly excited because when you live in a neighborhood and community, you want to put not just standard engineer infrastructure design, because you can put that anywhere in the city, but if you're really trying to connect with community, you also got to install design that is reflective of community. And so I'm really glad that, again, my colleague Davi is able to also utilize his artistic and cultural background to not just enhance safety, but also add a cultural element to it as well. So I actually don't know the cost of a single parking spot, Trisha, because I don't work in curb space management. So I would have to probably talk to an architect. Maybe they know how they design it and how much private property costs per unit. Can't answer that one. All right, T, next slide. And then only touch it once.
There you go.
All right. So
okay.
This one, I just wanted to share just the nature of the SDOT's work as a whole. So my team, I'm specifically in our Safe Routes to School program, as well as, our Safe Routes to School program is to encourage students within the city of Seattle to walk or bike to school through education, partnerships, enforcement, engineering, and projects. So it's a variety of tools. And also on the team, I am also part of our pedestrian program Crossings, as well as our City of Seattle sidewalks. So our team is responsible for installing and designing a majority of City of Seattle sidewalks within limits, with the exception of like a few if they actually belong to county lines, federal, state. But for the most part, it's usually our team. And so I just wanted to show some really standard sidewalks that are traditional concrete with a curb and curb ramps. So this is what you would see pretty much in majority of places. The city of Seattle also is experimenting with low-cost walkways where they use asphalt instead of traditional concrete, which you see in the photos here, primarily because as we got our nickname here in the city of Seattle, the city of cranes, there's constant development occurring throughout the city. And so when new development occurs in the city of Seattle, it is a responsibility of the developer to then bring their immediate impacts, such as sidewalks, up to code given our engineer standards. Does anyone, I want to see everyone put their guesses in the chat. How much do you think one block of sidewalk costs? $120 from Sam, $100K from Hammy, $1 million from Hendrik, $150 from Corinne, $300,000 from Kathy, and roughly $300,000 from Ananda, $250 from Debbie, $500 from Shawnee, $40,000 from Joan, low cost, $90,000. You changed your answer? Okay, so go ahead, Twee. You guys are a lot closer to Silent betting what price is right. It is $475,000 for just one traditional concrete sidewalk with curb ramps. And there's quite a few factors. Yes, Shawnee wins. There's quite a few factors that go into the cost of a traditional sidewalk, such as elevation, if there's a steep slope, if there's also drainage, such as when it rains, the water has to flow somewhere. We want to make sure there's not pooling or flooding because we still need to provide ADA access. And if it floods, that makes it very challenging, if not almost impossible, for someone who's blind or who operates a mobility device, such as a wheelchair. That can make it nearly impossible in the barrier. So just wanted to show a traditional sidewalk because hopefully these guests, some of them with some artwork and also what you think a sidewalk costs, will hopefully lead you to a next more expansive project that I wanted to share, because the small project, this is where we're installing it. It's great, it's reflective of community. These sidewalks, we're installing it because it is in our work plan that was dedicated by this 10-year pedestrian master plan. And it told us this is the criteria, this is where we're installing it. It has very little active community participation. It's more so like, FYI, here it is. You might get to vote on a tree that's in the landscaping, but really it's more of a one-way conversation. That's what I first learned in the first few years of my job. Next slide, Twee. But what I wanted to show next is one of my more expansive projects. This is what we call a capital project. This is in the U District neighborhood here in the city of Seattle. If you can imagine where the University of Washington is, it is very close, not near the Husky Stadium, but on the other side of the university campus. There is a new light rail station that just opened early in October called U District. And we reconfigured 2 blocks of the neighborhood between 15th Avenue to Brooklyn, which is roughly 2 blocks, and along Northeast 43rd. Traditionally, this road, if you can imagine, is only one way originally in each direction for all vehicle traffic. So bicyclists, for trucks, for freight, for a lot of different moving vehicles. Buses were not operated on this route. And there was a local city council member proviso specifically for this project because they did add additional funding. I'm not going to tell you how much just quite yet, that we had to explore potential reconfiguration design options that included a completely pedestrian only cross section. You might think that would be easy, but it is not. And so what we did here, I don't know if I included it. Can you just click it once, Twee? I think I just put cost. I did. Okay. So what we did here is, as you can see in this specific photo, there actually are a few businesses that you can see highlighted. And then if I had the photo in the other direction, you would see additional businesses as well as the US Post Office. And what we did is we coordinated with the local business organization for small business owners and convened them all to have a specific, very intentional collaboration in making sure we're validating and hearing their concerns, and also what kind of designs that they were looking for in their neighborhood. Mind you, that the construction for sound transit for a new light rail station has been still ongoing for the past 8 years. So these business owners by this time were really frustrated because they felt that they were feeling the economic, very real impact of losing business with part of the street closed down. And the only time that they get high amount of foot traffic is from the students coming and going during the school year. Yes, during the summer, tourists are still coming by, sort of. There's not as many students, maybe some summer faculty and some summer students in person. What I want everyone to put into the chat is just call out some of the design elements that you can see in this photo. Lighting, driveways, lots of planting, nice landscaping, drainage bioswale, a bus lane, space for people, tables, traffic lights and crosswalks, new sidewalks, short crossings. Yes, there is underground utilities. Okay, so thank you everybody for participating. These are a lot of elements that are in this project, but I also wanted to specifically call out a few things that people mentioned here in the chat. So first of all, the lighting. That, believe it or not, is a major component of what we heard during a lot of this outreach for a year and a half, where we talked to students on the university, some major stakeholders, including our fellow transit agencies such as King County Metro and Sound Transit. Sound Transit controls our light rail, and King County Metro controls the bus system, and they operate usually within our right of way. And so we have to partner a lot to accommodate for a lot of the priorities, which is for pedestrians, bicycling, and as well as buses. So what we see is that there is this bus lane that is dedicated for buses, and we also specifically hosted an ADA focus group where members with different abilities, whether it's visual, non-visual, physical, cognitive, we were very intentional on hosting an ADA focus group. So that way we wanted to recognize that this new light rail station is going to provide a huge mobility access for people in community. And if you can design a space that is accessible and mobile for everyone, that should, and first and foremost, include people with disabilities. So if you include the community and people with disabilities, you're off to a great start. And so we heard a lot from students, people at risk, that they wanted additional lighting. So you see more lighting on the street, and also more human-centered lighting, because if you look at the street signal, the original lighting that's very tall, believe it or not, in the evening, if folks have felt it while they're walking late-ish in the night, or even just around 7 p.m. because now it's winter and it's dark, that high lighting creates a lot of shadowing, and that can also feel unsafe. And so that very real perception we did here, made sure we had more human scale lighting. And then a lot of vehicles were passing down here, even though they're not going very fast. It's not very comfortable to have a previous narrow sidewalk next to a lot of vehicle traffic. And another item I do want to call out that someone mentioned that you saw space for people, specifically tables. So during COVID-19, our street use division launched a massive permitting. So people could either use parking spaces or the public right-of-way, such as sidewalks, as long as they still provided the minimum amount to walk through the sidewalk, they could have what we called street cafes. And so that would include the tables that you see on the public sidewalk. And this was only able to happen because we deliberately changed the right-of-way where we put it only one way westbound with a bus lane, and widen the sidewalks on both the east and west side of this street. And you also, if you can't see too well in the corner, there's also some tactile yellow bumps, and that is more for ADA folks. What is not pictured in this photo is there also is some additional art that was included in our project, where we have these metal inlays in the ground that leads from the light rail station heading towards UW to also recognize that this is a predominantly university youth-centered area. So yeah, there is a lot of elements in here. We definitely really heard from business owners frustration and anger, but we did not as a team pull back from hearing their anger, because it's very natural for business owners who this is their livelihood, this is their life. If they lose this business, they will have nothing else. And so we made sure to really validate their concerns, their frustrations, and make sure that we provide ample outlets and direct their concerns to the appropriate folks. I see a question in the chat. So a full motorized chair or wheelchair, again, a street use permit, if they follow guidelines intentionally, they have to at least with a minimum provide 4 to 5 feet of width, which is ADA compliance, for someone to be able to continue their pathway. So hopefully no one moves those tables. Can't answer, I can't do anything if someone moves it, but hopefully people are kind enough to keep the space clear. All right, and so for another round of guessing, for the first 2 guessing at the prices, how much do you think this 2 blocks of project, reconfiguring the right-of-way to have wider sidewalks, a dedicated bike lane, a dedicated bus lane, and landscaping, additional lighting, how much do you think this cost? Okay, so it looks like we're a little all over the place, but I see a few within similar ranges. All right, T, go ahead and hit the button. About $6 million. And believe it or not, this was also originally not a $6 million project. The original cost and money available was less, and we had to collaborate with King County Metro, saying that if you want a bus lane on this route, you need to kick in some money, because believe it or not, the weight of the bus can actually damage the street over extended periods of time. And if we have to do maintenance, that also requires quite a bit of money. So yeah, it's you know, cost of products, and especially when the COVID hit, just supply and demand went exponential. So things definitely should change over time. So with all these, I would say this project, which I had complete control over, was able to dictate a lot of the process, how I engaged community, not just inform them, but also really heard their concerns and also include their suggestions into design. It's just one of few examples I have actively worked on. And so Twee, go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we've been working on for the past couple of years and within the Seattle Department of Transportation is a transportation equity framework, where for 2 years, specific community members within the city of Seattle who are representative of an organization or I'm trying to think of the other word because I haven't practiced this piece enough. It's really new. Where for a 2-year process, they essentially studied the Seattle Department of Transportation, understood the gaps that we had internally, our challenges of engaging community externally. And they came up with these 8 equity strategy drivers: land use, housing, displacement, economic development, safety, transit access, mobility and transportation options, infrastructure, planning and maintenance, COVID-19, intersection with public health and transportation. That specific driver actually occurred in mid-2020 because that's when the pandemic hit. And that's when we added the additional driver because they were being adaptive to change in current circumstances. Then you have transportation justice. And then 2 fundamental equity strategy elements is community engagement and also decision-making, transparency, and accountability. So they all feed into each other, they all overlap, they all intersect. And so, Twee, next slide. And go ahead and hit it one more time. And so essentially this transportation equity framework is just going to be one of our tools to transform policies, procedures, and practices to undo structural and institutional racism within the Seattle Department of Transportation. We are going to be utilizing this equity framework as our North Star to not start over. That's not how we're going to address a lot of the institutional racism and structural racism within our city, or nor in the institution and our intersectional issues, as well as with the other areas within planning and also in community. But instead, it's going to be a community-guided vision that serves SDOT when we are considering equity priorities in our policies, in our programs and projects that specifically most impact Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and communities that have historically and currently been underinvested by government. And if you're wondering, why are we centering BIPOC? Because these are the communities that have been historically and are still currently been the majority mostly and continue to be underinvested by government and continually bear the brunt of a lot of consequences in the decision-making practices of every institution in the United States. And so if we're able to center these communities, then everyone else benefits. So the other 2 projects I originally highlighted, the small and the medium, we want to also change it at a different scale where we don't just inform folks regardless of scale of the projects. It's not only when we have millions of dollars that I'm able to then talk in community, incorporate their suggestions for design, that I'm hoping with this transportation equity framework, we are able to move beyond our traditional ways of engagement that are really rooted in white supremacy and also doesn't really acknowledge the historical damage that institutions have impacted BIPOC communities. So I'm very hopeful. I've been included in this process for the past 2.5 years. We are about to wrap up our last equity lab tomorrow. And then I'm also excited for when they do the rollout in 2022. So keep your eyes peeled on our web pages for when community members start going in throughout their communities and organizations in the city of Seattle. And we're so excited. We can't wait to make this much largely public. And I can't wait to see what happens within my organization and see some real long needed change. All right, and with that, I'll pass it off to Twee, or if folks have questions, feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hand.
I just love this North Star. Thank you so much, Belén. Thank you for being here to share all this amazing work that you're doing. This is so awesome. Questions. We can take questions now. Or we can break and come back with questions later. How about we do that? Let's do a break. Let's do a break for 10 minutes. Let's come back at 8:00. Folks are coming back from break. The days are definitely shorter. I feel like last week was just yesterday for some reason when we had Sarah and Arlene here. I think the days are just definitely getting shorter. So hopefully soon enough we'll get out of winter so we can see each other. Happy to have folks returning. Thank you so much, Belén, sharing all the things that you're doing in Seattle. With us also up in Seattle from the university is Kaleb. Kaleb, I'm not going to pronounce your last name right, so I'm going to have you say it. But the impetus for tonight was actually a conversation I had with Kaleb when we first met. Belén introduced us and we were talking about some work that Kaleb's doing. So I wanted to share this really amazing theme with the students tonight. And so from the conversation with Kaleb came Belén showing her work. And from there, I was like, I need to also bring in Quincy because he's also doing some amazing stuff in Portland. So I'm going to hand it over to Kaleb so he can share the stuff that he's doing. He's also working on a really important thesis currently right now. And I'll let you take it away before my dog goes crazy tonight.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Kaleb Germinaro. I'm a PhD candidate at UW in the Learning Sciences and Human Development program, which is in education stuff. Originally from Phoenix, Arizona, born and raised there, and then went to Philly for school and now in Seattle and been here for 4 years now. I was lucky to meet Belén maybe about a year ago. I think we were trying to figure this out like on Sunday. Because of this one project that I'm putting in the chat. It's a community map that me and my friends did a couple summers ago, mapping different spaces in the Seattle area that were either safe, noted as being safe, comfortable, or healing for Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. And this is like at the peak of the a lot of the like civil unrest and the racial injustices a couple summers ago. And so we were volunteering at a farm and like an urban farm, and we're like, oh, well, this is one of those spaces that people are actually comfortable being at. And so why don't we try and figure out which other places there are? So we collected a bunch of surveys and created this map. And so Belén and her colleagues have happened to see the map and reached out, and that's how we got to know each other. Oh, it doesn't. Let me see.
No, it's working.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it is working. I can
share a screen too.
Yeah, why don't you?
Yep. Yeah. So this map.
Kaleb,
huh?
Ananda, sorry. Ananda, can you make Kaleb a co-host? Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm good. I got it. So this is the map. So made it originally on Google, like Google Maps at first, because you can make your own maps there. But and started coding it. And then one of my friends like made the website for me. And he's a dear friend. But we ended up coding the spaces into different types of categories. So different art spaces around the city, different food and drinks, because we know food is at the core of a lot of really great things for a lot of people. Learning and education spaces, including schools, outdoor spaces, some health and wellness stuff, even some grocery stores, and then some other community organizations. And if you're familiar with Seattle, as far as like redlining maps go, the area where the highest concentration of those spaces are, which like right here in the middle where my cursor is, and then farther southeast, and then even farther, I guess like central south, I suppose, which is an area called South Park. Those are the places that were like either redlined or yellow lined, and divested from for quite a long time until now, pretty much, in the last 20 years, I suppose. And so it's not, you know, a coincidence that those spaces are really important to a lot of brown and Black folks in the city. That's where a lot of businesses that are Black and brown owned are still. Let's see. I do a lot of things with Belén actually now, which is kind of cool. But generally I work with youth, and at the core of my work is spatial justice teaching and learning. And then also taking into account how youth like should have a say in their world and how their built environment is being structured and being done, and what money is going into those spaces. So right now I'm doing my dissertation data collection, and Belén is actually a mentor on that program. But I'm gonna put in the chat the first iteration of this program, which was called the Tiny Cultural Space Program. So it's a collaboration between the Office of Arts and Culture and the City of Seattle, and then a carpentry architecture firm called Sawhorse Revolution. And they teach architecture and carpentry courses to high school age youth. And for this program, the youth or the city gives a plot of land to a community-based organization, and then Sawhorse facilitates the design of the physical space that the community-based organization will get to put on the land. And the youth are the ones who design it. And so I'm also on the board of Estelitas Library, which is a Black and brown social justice library in Seattle. And the first picture on the article itself is actually our new space and we're actually having our grand opening next weekend. So this is the space that youth designed, and they go through like a 6-8 week course on learning how to design the different things about place and space. Environmental justice is the center for this next iteration, and Belén is one of the mentors, and all the mentors are brown and Black as well, architectures, planners, designers, and different things. So that is more or less at the core of my work, because I think youth have a unique position in our world where they have to pretty much rely on public good, and get to see their neighborhood in a way that adults don't see the neighborhood, especially it being like in and on foot quite often. So they have a different type of way of seeing the world than we do. And they're very rarely involved in civic process as far as built environment stuff goes, and having a say in their spaces. So, and that's all I'm going to share for now, just so we have room for questions and stuff between Belén, Quincy, and myself.
Yeah, Kaleb, and the rest of the class, we actually do have a youth in our class, which is a first time. I don't think Quincy mentioned it either, or mentioned it to Quincy, but her name is Ada, and she's 15 years old. She's a sophomore in high school. Unfortunately, she's not here tonight. She's going to be watching this recording and hear about her name, but this is the first class that she's unable to make, but her application came through to attend this class, and we were like, this is amazing. It'd be great to have youth in this class. And so we do have somebody currently who is a youth, and can't wait to share this recording with her, and also even share your guys' contact, because I feel like there's so much that the high schoolers and everyone else could be a part of. But yeah, she's a superstar. She's with Sunrise PDX. So I'd love to send some your information to her if that's okay, because I think like she's just doing phenomenal work in the work that she's doing at a high school level and also in this course. So with that, I'm going to open this up for a panel Q&A. I'm really lucky and, like I said, really blessed to have all three of you here. Is so unique. It's not a typical class, so it's just a really cool opportunity to share. And yeah, let's open it up to some Q&A. There's a couple of them that came in through the chat. I'm just going to read the latest one that came in through Kathy. Kathy's asked or had asked to talk more about how you get young people fully engaged and what do cities need that we don't regularly provide. So really, I'll let any one of you take that.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it a little bit. So what I found, like, as far as youth, you can't force youth to do anything they don't want to do, right? Like, that's one thing that, like, they're going to tap into, like, something that they actually care about and that is pertinent to themselves, their identities, their wants, their needs and stuff. And you kind of just got to ride the wave from there, right? So we see in school quite often learning gets stifled because for various different reasons, but quite often it's because they get shunned from a interest, right? Or an interest that takes place. And so you have to kind of meet the youth where they're at. So all the youth in the program with Sawhorse Revolution, they all opt in to be there. Like, they all consent to be in the space. And so they also receive, so in Seattle Public Schools, there's a requirement for community service hours. So the youth have the option to either receive all of their community service hours for participating in programs, or they get to get a stipend. So asking youth to be there and asking them to do certain things for you, they should be paid for that service, right? And so should community members always, right? And being paid for their compensation, because they're taking time out of their day. And we know that Portland and Seattle are both really expensive places to live, especially if you are like a general, like, blue collar working family, right? So youth themselves, that is one way to keep them engaged, is like, whether it be incentivized via money or something that's a requirement for school. Another thing is like surrounding them with people that look like them, reflect them, somebody that they might have an interest in, actually being like, oh, I could do that because I'm seeing that this person does that. And sometimes that's all it takes. And sometimes it's a little bit more depth that needs to be there. And I mean, like, for the program that we're running right now, there's 8 students there, and they come in on Sundays for 4 hours on a Sunday. And sometimes it's like luck of the draw, because I know a lot of sports are going on right now too, and other extracurriculars, and weekends are just tough in the winter as it gets darker and things like that too. So I think that's quick and dirty, I guess, answer.
I can try to answer too. And I'm just now aging out of being a youth, but I'm 24, so I think I'm still kind of considered a youth. But I think the biggest thing that empowered me a couple of years ago when I was doing this work was getting support by mentors, particularly Lizzie at Alberta Main Street. She's a really great professional who really likes working with young people and giving them spaces to be a part of processes. But I think, like, what you mentioned, Kaleb, is really important. Like, compensating young people for their time and giving them leadership roles is really important. I think folks forget to realize that education progresses every year and gets better and better. And so the young people actually have, like, sometimes a higher understanding of some of the civil, justice work that we're doing or planning work that we're doing, and getting them involved in the process early can start building the capacity for skilled professionals in the future, and then actually having that lived and professional experience into community programming, which is really often hard to find, especially because so many youth of color leave the Northwest to places like LA, San Francisco, Dallas, that has more like larger people, like just larger communities of color in general. And I think the last thing too is just trying to move away from ageism. I think that a lot of youth like feel that they're not being involved in public processes because that they don't have the education background, they don't have the professional planning degree or something like that. And so they're not really able to actually be a part of a process. So trying to like see youth as the same as we see everyone else, I think is really the best way of getting people involved, because like young people see when they're not being treated, like when they're treated like children. And so it's best to like try to treat them like everyone else so that they can actually feel authentically involved in the process.
Yeah, Kaleb and Quincy, y'all like hit it on the dot. I think the only thing I'll add to this conversation is Quincy touched on it also, is believe it or not, if no one has heard of this private firm, it's called Thrivance Group, which is led by Dr. Destiny Thomas. And I have taken one of her online courses, and she actually does highlight this issue where not just the cognitive level, but more so that particularly amongst like the idea of teenagers and young adults, that it is a social construct of when we use the term youth, kids, or young adults, that we are essentially taking away their power about their knowledge, their experiences, and invalidating them. And so when we provide spaces, as Kaleb highlighted here, like agency, autonomy, and decision-making process, then they actually are more willing to participate, not just for a compensation, which they fully deserve, and especially for BIPOC students and young folks, because those are the voices who have been historically ignored, and more so like definitely shoved and shunned away, that we need to provide those spaces, because essentially these younger folks are the people who are going to be living in our design spaces in the future much sooner than we think. So with that, I'll pass it back to Twee.
Thank you. Any more questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns, epiphanies? There were some conversations in the chat that did a comparison between Portland and Seattle. I'm not sure if we want to address that or not.
I know
they're totally two different cities. They're very close to each other.
They are. Like, I have my planner brain, and then I have my personal Latina preferences brain, and then I also have my former still Californian at heart brain. Because I actually did my grad school in Portland State University for 2 years, Quincy. So that's probably why we never overlapped, because as soon as this job came up, quickly left, but I have a lot of friends down there. And so my initial reaction is both Portland and Seattle are probably ahead of a lot of other cities with dedicated spaces for bike lanes. But then there's also the very real implication and results of how this also is tied to gentrification, and the very real perception that when you install a dedicated bike lane, especially in BIPOC communities without consent and with their involvement, that it's not something they value. Yes, biking is a commute option, especially coming from South California, specifically Oxnard. There were a lot of Latinos on like really old bikes using these bikes to get to the fields to go pick whatever fruit, vegetable was that season, either in the sun or in rain, didn't matter. That was their mode of transit because it was cheap, affordable, within, I guess, range, or maybe not. Maybe they bike more than I do than when I became a bike commuter in Portland. But Portland's also very flat, like hella flat compared to Seattle. Like if you go to downtown Seattle, you're facing the hills like you were in San Francisco downtown. All right, because you got to recognize those hills were actually much more steeper before we were colonized here in the Pacific Northwest, and white folks literally tore into mountains of indigenous folks' land, saying like, "Why are you building here?" So there's that comparison, and you also have to be mindful of Portland's urban growth boundary that existed from, is it 1960s, Quincy? Do you happen to know?
It was like 1972-ish.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm off.
Yeah, it was in the 70s.
like
Okay.
when Metro was
70s,
established
70s.
around the same time.
Yeah, so you have that factor. And then you have the factor here of City of Seattle. We have a really changing landscape. It's geographically probably not much bigger than Portland as far as like square mile of footage, but it's also much lengthier from north end to south end because you also have our Puget Sound that plays a huge factor in how we travel, and the fact that their pinch points are our bridges. So I don't bike as often here in Seattle, mostly because it's hella rainy up here compared to Portland. And Portland's a lot flatter. That's just my perspective as a woman of color, specifically Latina. And I didn't bike when I was in California unless it was like on a beach cruise or along the beach or in a place that was far away from cars, because that's also not how I grew up. That's not how my community or let alone my immediate family members have. So I'm definitely changing their perspective that it might be feasible to think of a bike ride as more as a white people thing and more of like, or a need for transportation to get to work early ass in the morning, but that's where we're at. Also, I realize this is recording for your high school students. On my bad, I cursed. Quincy, Caleb, do you want to add anything to that comparison?
I can share, and I think I have a very similar experience to you as well, because I did my undergrad in California and LA. So, but I grew up in Portland. I definitely, when I grew up, had a perception that the rest of the world was like Portland in terms of like demographics. So it was very culturally shocking to go into like LA and actually have a lot of people that looked like me in spaces where I wanted to go. So going to alternative music concerts and just going to parks and that kind of stuff. I usually don't see Black people or brown people in those spaces in Portland, but seeing them in LA like definitely made me feel more comfortable just overall in public space. I think I have a lot of my family lives up in Seattle. My brother lives there, and so I've spent a lot of time in Seattle. I think Portland has a really great understanding of environmental and public space. So like I think we have a lot more like parks and trees and just like green space that is really accessible to all communities. Where I think like in Seattle, it definitely is like there's a space where green space is, and there's a space where green space isn't. And I feel like that's predominantly within South Seattle or areas where there's a lot of like folks of color. I think Portland's been doing a really good job over the past 20 years, especially Metro, creating more opportunities for green spaces in outside the region that's just not the central city. I think the bike culture, I think you hit it on the nail. Like it's very similar. Like I know when I was growing up and seeing all the bike lanes being put into Williams and Vancouver, and then seeing all the Black businesses and Black landowners lose their property. That was something that my family, like we often talked about at dinners. And I think was really the reason why I got into planning, because I wanted to make sure that, you know, as those resources are being put into communities, that we do have that discussion of like what it means to protect, like put a protected bike lane in those spaces when communities maybe don't even have like that great of clean water or that great of trees like cover or all these other things that need to be fixed in the community before bikes. I was a pretty avid biker just by out of necessity because I didn't have a car up until the age of 18. But I think like now that I have a car, I don't have the time or the energy to really bike. I'm a pretty busy person and I need to get places on time. And my hair is not the most conducive to wearing a helmet. And you know, there's just a lot of professional aspects of biking that is not really supportive, particularly for Black individuals. We're policed in our professional spaces and we have to show up in a certain way. And being sweaty on a bike is not necessarily the most professional way of showing up to space. And so I think that like when we think about bike culture and just public space, there's a lot of cultural conversations that we don't necessarily have around why people of color maybe don't bike, and maybe why they don't use a lot of active transportation spaces for a whole social amount of reasons.
Thank you, Quincy. Caleb, is there anything you want to add to that? No. Okay, we have a good 10 minutes. Hendrik has his hand up, so I'm going to take Hendrik's question.
Yeah, and feel free to throw this in the chat. Multimodal transportation to me is a green and equitable, that my understanding like future, but I totally understand what Quincy was just saying, but I don't have a good depth on that. Do you have any suggested readings or books that I could look into or we could look into to better understand why a bike lane is can be a bad thing in a community or can be a challenging thing? Any good resources would be useful, because I know that's a big topic and we don't have hours right now to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll go through and post them in the chat right now.
You know, for the transportation traffic class, one of the things that have been so instrumental in the work that I've done and also leading this course is it's not all about bikes. It's not all about cars. And then one of the big major things in our world is really climate change and what's going to happen in the world. And this is one of the first courses where we brought in trees and our urban spaces and tree canopy. I think that's really, really critical to make sure that we also contend to climate change and make sure that there's sustainability components to it. I also, once upon a time, sat on the urban forestry for Parks and Recs here in Portland. So being a tree advocate myself and also a transportation planner, former traffic engineer, there's a lot of real estate that has to contend with as much as like underground utilities and everything else. When we talk about transportation planning, we talk about so many other things. But also with Hendrik's question in terms of biking, how does that work in competition with all the others? I think that's a really great question and good impetus for us to think about when we are thinking about planning and building the infrastructure for ourselves. Previously, we had the freight master plan from our freight department or from PBOT come to share. So sharing the road with freight also is really as critical as much as sharing the road with bikes, and also for our Black and Brown communities, and make sure that everyone is safe is so critical. We have a few minutes left. I just want to really say thank you. I know we didn't get a chance to even talk about projects, but does anybody have any burning questions of any sort as to what we're going to do? So we break next week. Next Thursday is Veterans Day. And then next Saturday is our field trip. So we're doing field trip Belén on 82nd Avenue, Quincy on 82nd Avenue. Kaleb, if you want to join us. We're going to start at Holgate at a Starbucks at Holgate and 82nd and do a good 1.5 mile walk through the Lentz community and then the Jade District, and then stop for lunch at Favan. And it'll be led by Ashton Simpson with Oregon Walk. So I see a couple hands up. I think it may be related to projects or field trips. So Hendrik, yes? Nope, you're done. Sean.
Field trip.
Yes.
Is there bike parking at Favan? I was thinking of riding to Favan, locking the bike up, and then walking to the start. That way the bike would be there when we got back for lunch.
Oh, that's so smart. I don't know. I've never biked there, so I don't know. I don't even know the restaurant. The restaurant might know. Do you want me to give you the number? You can call them, or I can call them.
I was kind of doing some research on Street View and looking around, so I'll figure it out. I just thought maybe somebody might know offhand.
Yeah, I don't know right off my head, right off. That's a good question. Anybody else? Yeah, I don't know if there's bike parking at the restaurant. I call them today to reserve. We have about 20 people joining us, so it's going to be quite a group. We have about 9 from here and 7 from last year's class, in addition to me, Ananda, and Ashton with Oregon Walks. And we also have our representative Confam who's going to be joining us partway to talk about the work that they've been doing at 82nd Avenue. Thank you so much for joining. Yes, Sam?
I just wanted to say these presentations were great. There was really concrete examples of community engagement, and it wasn't clear to me at the beginning, you know, how this would look, and it gave me a feel for you know what we're talking about here. And so I thank everybody for doing these terrific, this terrific work. It really is inspiring. No question. Just a comment.
Yeah, thank you. No, this is amazing work. This is the work of the future.
Quick comment for Belén. We're actually working on a project that I think you'd be very excited with at PSU with the Digital Cities Equity or Digital City Testbed program. I'm going to reach out to you and Kaleb, and we're also working with the University of Washington. So there might be some collaboration we can do.
You guys have each other's emails. I think we've been in an email together. So thank you, everyone. Lots to think about from this course, from this course altogether. But tonight, I think it's a really special night having all 3 of you here.